expenses and controls. Hope everybody had a good week, and understand the weather's a little chilly in Saskatchewan today, so hopefully everybody's staying warm. It's nice and warm here in Maine. It feels like summer finally, so I'm happy. Anyways, just before we get going, let's take a look back at the first four webinars. Our first webinar was on, the importance of financial leadership in your career, and really bringing the idea home that you can do this and that it's going to be really good for your career as well as obviously the business you work in. Webinar number 2, where we talked about the different types of businesses, and we talked about principles and why we do what we do in the accounting world. Lots of terms and definitions. Webinar number 3, we learned about GAAP and the Uniform System of Accounts for the lodging industry. We got introduced to income statements and balance sheets and the fundamental accounting equation, as well as hotel financial statements. And then webinar number 4, where we really focused in on labor and productivity and learning how to calculate EFTEs and learning how to calculate productivity, how to schedule with productivity, and how to actually use this information for benchmarking going forward. So we've covered a lot of ground. And for today's session, as always, a copy will be available for you afterwards, as well as a copy of the recording. Use the chat for polls and questions. Anytime you have a question or a comment during the webinar, send it in, and Carrie will intercept those and tee them up for me. The purpose of these webinars is to increase your financial leadership skills. Nobody expects you to come out of this knowing how to be an accountant, but you all work inside of a business and you all have a huge part to play in the success of that business. And as you know now, it's not as scary as you think now that you got your feet wet. I invite you to play full out and participate today. Don't hide out. And always remember to shift your thinking. Shift your thinking from thinking accounting to learning and curiosity and growing your abilities. You're going to have greater career success. And always remember this. Always, always, always. It's not accounting. It's business thinking. And it's not the hard part of hospitality. So today we're going to talk about expenses, different types and buzzwords, and how we kind of confuse the word expense with other things, how we use them. We're going to talk about using something very specific called zero-based expenses. We're going to do a little exercise on the 2% solution. It's a real good strategy for problem solving. Then we're going to talk about purchasing, accounts payable, and inventory controls. We're going to talk about how you can create and use your own hotel expense checkbook. We're going to talk a bit about the hotel budget. We're going to kind of open the door to that. And then we're going to talk about financial leadership, what it's all about. And we're going to wrap things up today with some key operating controls that you need to make sure you have in place in your hotel. All right, so when managing expenses, really what we want to be able to zero in on is having a plan and beginning with the end in mind. I stole that from Franklin Covey from his 7 Habits, but it's really the important thing we need to focus in on when we're talking about the financial process inside of the hotel is really having an end game. And in this case, the end game is understanding what's going on with our business and being able to actually control it and be able to finish the year with a sense that we were in charge of our destiny rather than just kind of going wherever the wind takes us. So when we talk about managing expenses, we're talking about things, not people. Or another way of looking at it is we're talking about expenses, which are goods and services. Expenses are not labor. And I know we confuse these terms because we often say, the biggest expense in the hotel business is labor. Well, labor is an expense in the sense of it's deducted from, the revenues and the P&L to get the profit. But expenses are separate from labor. Expenses are for things, goods, and services. So don't confuse the two. It's just really important. So there are basically two types of expenses. There are fixed and variable expenses, or costs. Again, these words are interchangeable, expense and cost. But a fixed cost is something that remains the same irregardless of the sales. And a variable cost is something that changes based on activity. So, one of our biggest variable costs is labor in our business, but labor also has a fixed component. So some expenses can be both fixed and variable, or you could even say they're fixed, semi-variable, and variable, just depending on how we look at it. Some examples of really fixed costs are property taxes, insurance. Those things never change. Maybe they go up, but they certainly don't fluctuate. And the best example of a variable cost would be something like food cost, where it varies just about completely based on revenue. The higher the revenues, the higher the food cost dollar amount is going to be. Also, when we talk about expenses, not all expenses are equal. We have two different types of competing expenses. One is what we call capital expense, and the other is operating expense. Well, the first one we want to talk about today is operating expense, and that's what all of you deal with every month inside of your hotel. The expenses to run the hotel, the goods and services we need to purchase in order to, service our guests, give them the things they need, things like shampoo, things like toilet paper, things like linen. Those are all operating expenses. Capital expenses are what are injected into the business, typically by the owner, on an annual basis, and every so often when a big project is done, like a renovation, they'll pour an inordinate amount of money in. Those are all what we call capital expenses, and we recover the cost of those capital expenses using the matching principle over an extended period of time. So if we buy new beds for the hotel this year, we're going to amortize those beds, which means we're going to divide the cost by the next 5 years. So we're going to divide the bed that costs $600 by 60 months and charge ourselves $10 a month in our capital expense or our FF&E expense for that bed, and so on. So two different types of expenses, and they're not equal. When we're talking about expenses, we're really focusing on using the accrual basis of accounting. So in the accrual basis of accounting, the time of the transaction is what's important. When we exchange money is not. And at the very base of the accrual accounting process is the matching principle. And that's a key one to understand when we're managing our expenses. Another important expense principle that comes into play is the materiality principle, because we don't treat all expenses that are operating expenses the same way. Most hotels will do what we call direct expense things like straws, garbage bags, toilet paper, the things that are not very expensive, the things that people typically don't want to steal from us or abuse. Whereas on the other hand, we'll treat something like tequila very differently. We will put it into inventory, we will put it on the balance sheet, we will count it every month, and we expense it based on our consumption of tequila. So materiality is really important when it comes to looking at the different types of expenses. Always be thinking about whether this expense is a material expense or an immaterial expense. When we talk about expenses, we have a lot of buzzwords we kind of use. One is prepaid expenses. So all the prepaid expenses is an expense that has value to more than one period. And prepaid expenses, when we pay them, maybe I pay the elevator contract for the next 6 months. Gives us elevator service. Even in the middle of the weekend at night, I can call and get a serviceman to come. But I pay for that. The cash is gone, but I have an asset on my balance sheet called prepaid elevator expense. And then I amortize it into the financial statement each month with the appropriate portion of that expense. So that's a prepaid. Inventory is another good example of an expense. So when we buy the inventory, when we buy the tequila, we put it on the balance sheet and then we amortize it, and it becomes part of the income statement as food cost, or beverage cost in this case, as an expense at that time. So inventory actually moves through our financial process. we talk about expenses, we need to be cognizant of accruals and deferrals. So the accruals every month, I'm sure in your hotel, someone's asking you for you to submit your accruals. Well, we do that so that we can match the revenues and expenses. But a deferral is the opposite. It's when we actually have paid for something, but we don't want to actually recognize the expense this month. So again, we have different types of expenses, and accruals and deferrals help us make sure that we're matching revenues and expenses in the proper period. So you can see the little diagram here where we can see what happens first and what happens second. So for the accrual, the first thing we want to be able to do is recognize the revenue and expense. In this case, recognizing the expense, and we actually don't have the invoice yet. So the second thing that happens is we actually get the invoice and pay it. The second thing is the cash flow. With the deferral, it's different. The cash flow happens first, and then we recognize the expense. So two different things going on at the same time, but they affect how we record and manage and talk about our expenses. Having these things that's kind of at the tip of your tongue may seem a little tricky, but it just takes a little bit of practice. So accruals, one thing we always want to be cognizant of is that every single time we do an accrual, if I do accruals this month for expenses that you gave me, I'm going to automatically reverse them next month, because the idea is you'll give me the invoice next month. And if I don't reverse the accrual, then I actually end up expensing it twice. So you'll often hear people in your accounting department talking about reversing the accruals. Well, it's just something that happens every month. Actually, the computer takes care of it. And it's just part of our jargon and what we do. So to wrap it up with different types of expense, there's even a contra expense. And I know I'm dating myself here, but if anybody remembers the arms for the Contra Arms disaster that Ronald Reagan had with Oliver North, they called it the Contra Affair. And contra expenses are actually a simple thing where we actually don't exchange money for goods and services. We exchange our goods and services. And a lot of hotels participate in that, especially when it comes to things like advertising. Quite often, we'll have a contra deal with a radio station, for example, and we'll trade room nights or maybe a meeting or a dinner for advertising. But that doesn't mean that it's free. It simply means that we need to record it differently on our books, recording the asset and the liability, and then also recording the revenue and expense when we exchange or when we consume those goods. But that's what contra expenses are all about. Okay, polling question. Get ready to answer this one. Does your hotel do a monthly expense forecast? And when I say that, I mean, like, is it done in detail like it's laid out here? These are the maintenance expenses for a hotel. Would I actually be able to find this in detail inside of your hotel? Yes or no in the chat box. And then we're going to come back in a few minutes, and Carrie's going to kind of give us the score on that one. But the question is, does your hotel do a monthly expense forecast? All right, switching gears a little bit, I want to talk briefly about the expense dictionary. So believe it or not, our industry actually has a book, and I've talked about it before, but part of the book, it used to be a separate book, but part of the book now, the back section, is the expense dictionary. And the expense dictionary does exactly what you would think. It actually helps us figure out where things go. And that can be a very confusing thing, because people want to put things in certain places for whatever reason. Maybe they don't want it in their department, so they say it's a rooms expense when it's really a food and beverage expense, and vice versa. But the dictionary kind of takes all of that away, because it's got umpteen hundreds of different things in there, and it tells us where they need to go, and that's our industry standard. It's produced by the Hospitality, Finance, and Technology Professionals, HFTP, which is an international association, along with the American Hotel Association. And it helps us maintain the standard. And if we're running a company, especially where we've got multiple units, if we're doing things inconsistently across the properties when it comes to recording expenses, it's going to be very hard to figure out what's going on. So it's really important and it's useful to help us maintain the standard. And some hotels and hotel companies even make up a little cheat sheet for you so that every department has their own little tab and you can see what's included in your expenses. And we spell it out in, the language we want to use inside of our company, but it follows the uniform system of accounts so that things are recorded consistently. This is great too, because you can also put it on your computer drive, share it with people inside of your operation, so we don't have to kill any trees and have paper copies. Okay, I want to talk about budgeting and forecasting expenses using a zero base. So as the thing picture indicates, we're going to go from 0 to hero. So this is a really fundamental way in which we can do our expense budgeting that's going to allow us to actually really know what's going on. So zero-based expenses are nothing new, but what they are essentially is the opposite of doing our budgets based on a cost per cover or a cost per room occupied or a percentage of revenue. I mentioned in the beginning, telling the story about the GM that I worked with that wanted his budget done this way. And as far as I'm concerned, all budgets should be done this way. But what it is it's the opposite of doing it on a percentage of revenue or a cost per cover or cost per room night. So what we need to know is we need to know what are our expenses, because they are what make up the middle of your statement. So if you've got a handle on your revenues and you know what's happening and you have a handle on your payroll, then the third piece is understanding what's going on with your expenses. And what we need to be able to do is forecast them each month. But we want to be able to forecast them in detail, because it's not enough to be able to say that, my guest supplies are going to be $84,000 this month. That's not a very useful number. What I want to be able to do is I want to be able to make a list of what my expenses are inside of each and every account. And when I do a workshop like the one I'm doing with you now, I talk about making a grocery list. And if I sent every one of you to the store with $200 and said, get some groceries, get what you need for the next week, all of you would come back with a bunch of groceries. You would all have spent the $200, I can guarantee it. But how do you know what to buy? How do you know what you need? So what we want to do is we want to stop and make a grocery list. So if I send you to the store with a grocery list of everything that I need, along with the prices that I expect you to pay for it, you're going to come back with what's on the grocery list. And it's basically a way of planning our activities so that we are successful rather than just kind of hoping it works out. So no one's going to do this for you. You need to do the heavy lifting to get inside of this, but it's really something that only needs to be done on the heavy lifting only once, because once you've done it once, it kind of repeats itself each month and you're going to learn based on that activity. But you need to be able to dig to get the information. You need to really get inside what's going on with your numbers inside the middle of your statement and dig and get the details. And how do you do that? Well, you need to look inside the general ledgers and the past invoices. So you literally need to sit down and pull together a bunch of reports and a bunch of invoices and organize all that information by account so that you can actually come up with your grocery list for each and every account. How many of these, how many of those, what are the prices, what do I think I'll need, what's my plan for the month? So what we also need to do is remember, the only thing we know for sure about the forecast is it's going to be wrong. We're never ever going to be able to get it exactly right. But the more we do this and the more we practice zero-based expenses, the smarter we're going to get. We're going to know infinitely more after month 1 than we did before we started. And after month 3, we're going to have a very good handle. And after month 12, we're going to know like the back of our hand what our expense forecast needs to be. And as volumes go up and volumes go down, and the predicted occupancy is going to be what it's going to be, we're going to know what we're going to need. It's going to help us manage our business. Okay, and just to wrap things up, it feels really good to be on top of your expenses. Nobody wants to go to work tomorrow to have to go to a meeting and explain why there's a big variance from the forecast to the actual expense or payroll or even revenue numbers. Being able to accurately forecast your expenses is really good and it feels good. You should take a lot of pride in being able to do that. Okay, we're going to ask another polling question, but before we do, I'm going to circle back with Carrie and ask her what the result was from the first one.
Okay, one person said no, another said not sure, and the rest said yes.
Excellent, that's really good. I know a lot of you are from the same company, so I'm imagining that that's the way you do things, and that's great. Good for you. So here's the second polling question. And the second polling question is, do you use purchasing controls in your hotel? Do you use things like purchase requisitions, purchase orders, receiving reports? Yes or no in the chat box. Do you use purchasing controls in your hotel? Okay. So we're going to jump in now. I'm going to talk about a hotel business strategy. And I call it the 2% solution to problem solving. So all of us have challenges at work. You can even use this at home, but it's mostly for work. But all of us have challenges at work, and we have big problems to solve. And we tend to look at big problems and think that there must be a big solution. But really what we want is we want a bunch of little solutions. That's why I call it the 2% solution for solving a problem. So this is how you do it. So you start with defining your problem in writing. And maybe your problem is, I really want to improve my hotel expense knowledge. And you need to ask yourself this question. And you need to be able to write down the very first thing that comes to your mind, or even do this with another person where they ask you this question. It would be like, David, if you really wanted to improve your hotel expense knowledge, you would, and then I have to come up with an answer really fast. And I would review my GL. And then you repeat the question. You repeat exactly the same question. If I really wanted to improve my hotel expense knowledge, I would get a copy of the expense dictionary. Okay, if I really wanted to improve my expense knowledge, I would get friendly with the person in accounts payable so that I can get copies of invoices as they come in. Oh, okay, we're getting some good ideas here. And then I repeat the question again, and I repeat the question again and again and again until I have 15 or 20 things I could do to improve my knowledge of what's going on with my expenses. And then you know what you do is you pick 2 or 3, the very best ideas, and then you get to work on them. And then you come back and you revisit your list later when you've exhausted your attempts around those things, and you look at other items you came up with. And you can repeat this exercise over and over again, because this is how you solve problems, especially inside of the hotel business. There's not ever one single solution. There's a multitude of things. And your job is to figure out what the first thing is you need to do that, and do the next. I've always said, and I often say, is that the hotel business is a game of inches. And if you want to improve the process around anything, it's a bunch of little things you need to do. And this is a great exercise that you can employ to figure out what to do first, how to approach a problem. Okay. Purchasing, accounts payable, and inventory controls. So basically, controlling expenses. So it's one thing to manage expenses and to be able to forecast them, but once we start buying things and once we want to start paying things, we need processes to control expenses. So they're kind of two separate things. I'm going to talk in this segment about controlling your expenses. What are the best practices? So here are some policies from part of my business that I do is I help companies write policies, but I've cherry picked what I think are the top purchasing and AP and inventory control policies. And the first one is online purchasing. So that's becoming something that's really popular these days. Even, buying things on the internet, buying things over the phone, using credit cards for purchasing. But the important thing we want to remember is that an online purchase is still requiring approval before the purchase is made. It doesn't mean because we're doing it online that I don't need approval or that I can get it after the fact. In order to properly control your expenses, approval always needs to happen before the decision to purchase the item is completed. So online purchasing still requires a purchase order. The second one is alcohol receiving and storage. So alcohol is really special because people like to drink, people like to steal alcohol, and it just seems to have legs of its own if we don't lock it up. But with alcohol, we want to make sure that the storage facility is readily available and that the receiving agent is able to lock up the alcohol after receiving it. He needs to make sure that the list of the products that were ordered are all checked to make sure that the orders match what's actually received. And the alcohol, when received, must be accompanied by a complete list of the inventory. So it's a special thing. It's right up there with food. It's 100 times more important to do this properly than it is to look after receiving the toilet paper, as an example. Again, toilet paper, bags, people aren't interested in that stuff. Alcohol is very, very important. Okay, the next one is the use of requisitions. So when it comes to beverage, and we're talking about beverage and food here, we need to have requisitions. If we have a storeroom and we have a multiple outlets or even have one outlet, we need to use requisitions. Nobody gets products from the storerooms, especially the liquor in the food storeroom, without preparing a proper requisition. It's critical control for your business because people need to realize and need to think that the products that they're requesting are being controlled. And if you do nothing other than just require the use of a requisition, it's still a very valuable control. Some people then take those requisitions and create a perpetual inventory system where they track the inventory. Not all hotels have the resources to do that, but having requisitions and requiring a requisition with a date, a signature, and the products that people want is critical. Storeroom key controls. So if you have a storeroom inside of your hotel for food and for liquor, you need to make sure that it's locked up at all times when there isn't somebody in there, and that there's key controls for that storeroom. So typically at security or the front desk, those keys need to be signed out, signed back in at the end of the stock pickup or whatever it is, or if there's a storeman, they need to be signed in at the end of the day. Under no circumstances should those keys ever be taken home, or should copies of those keys ever be made. Because quite literally, we're talking about a room that has tens of thousands of dollars worth of inventory in some cases, sometimes even more. So having key controls for your storeroom is critical. New vendors all require approval. So in the hotel, we want to make sure that the director of finance or the general manager or someone in a senior position approves all new vendors. We can't just add a vendor. We want to make sure that we want to be doing business with this vendor, that the vendor isn't somebody's cousin or brother or next door neighbor. I can't tell you how many times inside of hotels I've had to untangle situations like that where we're doing business with someone we shouldn't be doing business with. So the control you want to put in place is making sure all new vendors require approval. And most of the time, the system is set up in such a way, the computer system for accounts payable, that someone else has to approve a new vendor before it's active. You want to get competitive bids for things. So anytime you're buying an item that's expensive, typically things that aren't bought all the time every month, But great examples of this would be equipment, or in maintenance when we're doing projects where we have repairs or we have something being built. We want to make sure we get at least 3 competitive bids. And again, I can't tell you how many times I've been in hotels where certain people seem to want to give all of their business to the same vendor all the time. And they don't ever go out and get competitive bids for things. And you're losing money, and you're getting probably getting taken advantage of if that's the case. So using competitive bids is the way around that. And most companies would set up a control where if it's over a certain dollar value, there must be evidence of at least 3 competitive bids. And I know what a lot of people will say, that takes a lot of extra time or whatever. It may, but it's also good business. Invoices and packing slips. So invoices and packing slips are critical for internal controls. Goods coming into the hotel require a vendor to produce and deliver an invoice or a packing slip along with those goods. Because what that invoice or packing slip does is it forms proof of delivery. And we want to be able to then match that with the other important documents. But if something is received to the hotel and for whatever reason there isn't an invoice or a packing slip accompanying it, one needs to be made up. So if you receive goods into your department and it's a couple of cases of this and a couple of cases of that, and there's no packing slip, you need to make up a slip so that you can then turn it into accounting and let them know that the goods have arrived. Hopefully an invoice will arrive to accompany it, but if it doesn't, you need to make up a packing slip, because there's no way they will know the goods have ever been received, and that's a critical control. In accounts payable, we operate, this is like the Holy Grail, but we operate on what we call the 3-way match. And that's where we have to match an approved purchase order with proof of receipt. That's normally a packing slip or an invoice, and the final payment. So typically when we pay our bills, the check comes attached with the purchase order and the invoice and the packing slip. So there can even be 4 documents there, but the invoice and the packing slip are kind of the same thing. But when I would sign checks and release those funds, I'm not going to sign that check unless these documents are here. And I go into businesses all the time that are paying their bills, and they're just running the checks, signing them and mailing them. They don't even know that the goods were ever approved for purchase or that they were ever received. And it's critical. If you care at all about protecting the assets you have in your hotel, the key control for cash distribution is the accounts payable 3-way match. Okay, separation of duties. So in the purchasing world, separation of duties is another critical control. So basically we want to separate the purchasing and the approval and the receiving of goods. And I know for a lot of you, you may say, well, that's really hard to do in our hotels. Well, separating, the person who wants it from the person who approves it should not be that difficult, because all of you have got somebody you report to. So that's the person who needs to approve your request, usually the general manager. If it's not the general manager, in some cases, maybe it's a regional manager. If you work in a department, maybe it's your department manager that's approving it. So maybe organize it so the request comes from someone else inside of the department. And then as far as receiving it goes, to separate that, you might not have a receiver in your hotel. So then what you do is you figure out who in maintenance can be the receiver for the stuff coming into the rooms department, and who at the front desk can be the receiving person for the stuff coming into the maintenance department. All we want to do is make sure there's a separation of duties so we can hold people accountable. If I can order my stuff and approve my stuff and receive my own stuff, I can do whatever I want. And again, I've worked in so many hotels where this is a big problem. People are ordering things that they shouldn't be ordering. We're getting invoices for something else. They're being put in to be payment, and it creates problems. It creates fraud. So separation of duties. And finally, the most important critical control for purchasing and accounts payable is the use of purchase orders. And I know a lot of hotels don't use them, But if you're not using purchase orders, it means there's no way you're approving or no way that someone's approving things that need to be ordered. And in order to control your expenses, the purchase order is the key because it's presented to the person in charge of the business, usually the general manager or the director of finance or the department head. And it allows us to organize what's coming into the hotel, and it allows us to, before we commit our funds, decide whether or not we need it. And I can't tell you the number of times people have brought me POs for things, and they're ordering way too many, or they're ordering the wrong thing, or they've got the wrong price. And once you send a purchase order to a company, it's a legal commitment. So use purchase orders. Make sure that things are approved before you buy them. Okay. So now I want to switch gears and I want to talk about how to use a checkbook. So lots of our computer systems have checkbooks in them and they're quite useful. But you don't need to use a computer system. You can do this on Excel. You can do this on a plain piece of paper. But here's basically what your checkbook looks like. And you use it to control your expenses so that you know what you're buying. And it's also a great way to create the data you need for your zero-based expense. So basically what you do is let's say we use Excel. It's probably the most efficient way to do this. We open up a spreadsheet and we create a tab for each expense account that I'm responsible for. So maybe I'm the housekeeper and maybe I'm responsible for cleaning supplies and I'm responsible for gas supplies and paper goods. So I've got 3 accounts. And all I do is I write down every single item that I order for every single month, different tab. And I write down the description of the item, the amount ordered. Then I wait and I write down what has arrived. So in other words, what was received and whether or not I have a signed invoice in accounts payable. I record those items, like the first one, toilet paper, $500 was ordered, $500 arrived, $500 invoices in accounts payable, no accruals required. Great, now I know how much toilet paper I bought this month. I have my own record. On the next one, with pillowcases, we ordered $300 worth of pillowcases, but only 250 arrived. And guess what? They didn't send along a invoice. So what happens with that? I need to put that expense into the current period, so I need to accrue it. I need to accrue $250. So what this also serves for at the end of the month is an automatic accrual that you can send on to accounting so that when they ask you for your accruals, you don't have to start looking around your desk and trying to figure out what's going on with all the things you bought. So you can see what's happening here. We want to be able to create the list that allows us to know what we've bought each month. First item column is the description. The second is for what you ordered. The third is for what arrived. The fourth is for the invoice and whether or not it was received. And the fifth is the automatic calculation of the accrual. It allows you to track your expenses. And I'm almost willing to bet that the housekeeper inside of your hotel probably uses this. But if the rest of you aren't using it, it's a really good, simple tool to figure out your expenses as well as control the expenses. Okay, I want to talk about hotel budgets just briefly, but budgets are a big deal inside of hotels. And I know for a lot of people, they kind of wonder what it's all about. So what is it and why do we prepare one? Well, the budget is really the business plan, but it's expressed in numbers. So it's basically what we want to achieve. And there's a saying that goes like this: if we don't have a map, any road will take us where we want to go. And I work with a lot of customers that when I ask them, what their budget is for the year, they have to kind of somewhat sheepishly tell me that they don't do one or they don't have one. And they haven't taken the time to create a budget. And that's really a dangerous way to go when it comes to managing your business. But the budget will allow you to create goals for your business and be able to share those goals with the owners, the management company, also the colleagues and leaders, and create a plan that's going to allow a greater measure of control inside of your business. And I teach a complete system that actually takes hotels from not having a budget to figuring out their expenses and their payroll and their revenues and putting it all into a spreadsheet with a bunch of tabs so that they can actually start tracking their monthly P&L values and focusing on the year-end profit and loss targets. So, I can't imagine a business this year not having that kind of a system if they're still using the cash accounting system and not having an accrual accounting system and using the budget. So I get this question a lot. Why does it take so bloody long to do the annual budget inside of most hotels? Well, what people need to realize that there's a lot at stake with the budget. And when we're in a hotel where we've got a brand and a local management company and maybe a owner, everybody's kind of jockeying for position. And the owner wants to make sure that the brand doesn't put in a bunch of fluff inside of the budget. And the hotel manager and the local team, they want to make sure that they can operate the budget and achieve the numbers and achieve the revenues that are inside of the budget. So they need the resources, they need the payroll, they need the expenses, they need the advertising budget. So this big drawn out, sometimes protracted, it can take months to get the budget approved because there's so much at stake. And when you look at most hotel management agreements inside of a branded managed hotel, the management team needs to hit the budget. If they don't, they can actually lose the management of the hotel. It's one of the two strikes typically inside of the annual, inside of the hotel management agreement is you must make the annual budget. And if you don't, it's a big deal. So people push back really hard on numbers and projections, and there has to be several reviews, and it can take months to prepare the budget. So that's just a little bit on budgets. I want to switch gears now and talk about another hotel business strategy. And it's what everyone needs to know about financial leadership skills. Kind of a top 10 list, but number one is we want to be treating the numbers with the same amount of attention and detail that we do for the guests and the colleagues. And I know I've talked about this before, but it's so critical that we don't leave the numbers until 4 p.m. on Friday and hope that we can get things done and off our desk. They've got to be just as important. We've got to be able to talk about them in our daily lineups. We've got to make sure that we're part of the forecasting and budgeting process. We've got to make sure that we know what our numbers are and that we adjust our spending during the month, that we can pivot and actually deliver on the targets that are set based on the changing revenue picture. And the only way to do that is to make them and bring them into our world so that they're just as important as guests and colleagues. And based on that, what it also really means is that everyone needs to play together. This isn't just about what's going to be going on in the accounting office or the general manager's office or the executive office. Every single department inside of the hotel and every single leader needs to be part of the process so that we have everybody doing their part. That's the only way we have a successful team inside of our hotels is if everyone works together. The third part, is get and be a mentor. Find someone inside of your company who's ahead of you. And when it comes to financial leadership skills, ask them for advice, ask them for training, find out what's going on with the senior leaders inside of your team and get on board. And then at the same time, what you want to be able to do is get the other people inside of your department, inside of your world on board so that you're training them. An old boss of mine used to say, if you know how to do something and you're not showing and training someone else that works with you on how to do that, you're not doing your job. So what that really means is we need to always be figuring out new things and always getting things off of our plate and teaching those to the people that work for us. That's leadership. But getting and being a mentor is key. Practice what you know. You can't do this part-time. You need to work today to make things better tomorrow. Practicing your financial leadership skills, digging into the things that you need to do, and not leaving it for tomorrow, not making it less important than it needs to be. Practice it, bring it into your world. It's like anything else. If you want to learn how to play an instrument, you need to practice. You learn how to play a sport, you need to practice. Well, this financial leadership and being proficient with your numbers and bringing that into your life and growing your career, it's not going to happen by itself. And if you take an active role in finding out how to practice, if you do that today, you do that every day, your tomorrows are going to be a lot brighter. The numbers are not going away. It's part of our world. It's part of your job. You're never going to master them. They're never going to be 100%, and they're never going away. You're never going to get to a point in your career where you don't have to deal with numbers. The further you go up the chain of management, the more you're going to have to deal with them. You're never going to get to a place or a plateau where you have nothing to do with numbers. They're not going away. So don't think that way. It's a monthly circle. Create the circle. What we need to do inside of our hotels every month is exactly the same. Things I do in May will be the same things I do in June. I need to do my forecast. I need to track my revenues. I need to adjust my purchase orders. I need to adjust my schedules. I need to review my financials. I need to write my commentary. I need to start all over again. It's a circle every single time, every single month. And it's how we practice. If I complete the process every month and I realize that that's my window, and the window opens and closes every single month inside of my hotel, and it's my opportunity to start over again and complete the circle, I'm going to get better and better and better. Always be sharpening your tools. Figure out what tools we use. How am I utilizing them? If you've got computer systems and you've got processes, how are you using them? I go into so many hotels and they've got incredible investments in technology and they're not even using it. Look around your hotel, look around your company, look at the stuff you're using. And if you've got a computer system and there's a bunch of menu items on that system you've never even used, then you've got tools that need to be sharpened. Watch for and correct the financial disconnect. So inside of your business, if you don't know what the financial scoop is, that means there's a disconnect. Because inside of every one of your hotels, there's someone that knows what's going on financially, and someone that's communicated with the owners or the brand or the management company, what the forecast is, what the budget is, what the projections are. And if you're not operating with those same numbers, there's a disconnection. And it exists in a lot of hotels, but watch for it. Are you connected? Do you know what's going on? Do you have the right financial connection inside of your hotel? It should be one seamless connection from the top of the organization right down to every single operating department. Always realize that financial leadership is an investment. It's never an expense. So when you think about your career and you think about how you want to get ahead and what you want to do one day and you want to be a GM, you're going to constantly need to be leading your team because you're going to have to achieve results. And the only way you can do that financially is to realize that you need to invest in your team. You need to train them. You need to have a group of people behind you that are all rowing in the right direction with the right oar and the right piece of water at the right time. That's the only way you can manage proficiently. So look at it as an investment. And so many times I talk to hotel owners and GMs and they tell me that, they can't afford training because, things are tight, things are tough. But this is not an expense. It's an investment. You want to be able to manage your business, you need to be constantly investing in it. It's like looking after the building. If there was a hole in the lobby ceiling and water was rushing in, we would get it fixed because it's going to ruin our lobby. Well, if we have a hole in our expense process or our labor process, money is rushing out. So it's exactly the same thing. And we need to always be talking that way and communicating that way. And finally, always be of service. Your job at the end of the day is leadership, and it's about serving people, helping people, The people that work for you want to be educated. They want to be shown the way, and it's your job to give them that. They're not there to serve you. You're there to serve them. With financial leadership, that is so important. Okay, key hotel operating controls. So we have a lot of controls inside of our hotels, but there are some that really trump each other. One is clearly understanding that revenues and settlements must be done every single day. So in other words, we need to balance our books inside of the hotel every single day, run all the reports we need to, make sure that everything balances, make sure that the daily revenue journal is posted properly, and that all of our subledgers balance. And if you've never gone through this process inside of your hotel, you really need to, because it's kind of the backbone of what happens from a revenue point of view inside of our hotel. And with revenues, the other side of them are the settlements, the cash, the credit cards. And knowing that that's an integral part of what happens every day and understanding how it works inside out is critical. Another thing you want to make sure you do is a daily rooms for verification. And I know that a lot of people have gotten away from doing this. And really what it is a check between housekeeping and the front desk. Housekeeping cleans the rooms, front desk checks them in and checks them out. But, if we don't do a daily rooms verification, people can actually be utilizing those rooms and they're not put through the system. And if we're not doing a daily verification, people can be actually defrauding us of money and our resources by how they control those rooms. So look at what you do inside of your hotel. If you're not doing an independent verification between the front desk and housekeeping when it comes to occupied rooms, and again, you can't really do this with the computer system. It'll give you the report, but someone actually has to go and check for discrepant rooms. Buffet cover counts. This is a real problem inside of our hotels, but if you don't have somebody at the door counting covers and making sure that that cover count at the end of the meal period is compared to what's put through the point of sale system, you're wide open for double billing. And if you don't think it happens inside of your hotel, think again. It's one of the biggest scams. Daily sign-off packages inside of the hotel. So every single day inside of the hotel, there are a lot of documents that the senior leadership team need to review and sign off on as a key control. And part of the package needs to be things like rebates, adjustments, room rate discrepancy reports where rates have been changed. They need to be authorized. If my rate for a room is X and I'm selling it for $25 less, why? Who authorized that? Anytime we have any kind of financial transaction where we're making an adjustment to the system, needs to be signed off on. There needs to be a reason. And that package needs to be circulated around the hotel. Should also include checks signed by managers for duty meals, entertainment, anything like that. But if you don't have a daily package inside of your hotel, it means that nobody's reviewing all the things that are transacted that aren't normal transactions inside of your hotel. PCI compliance. This is a big deal these days inside of our industry, but PCI stands for Payment Card Industry Compliance. And we need to make sure that our systems are all completely compliant, because we can be hacked, we can lose data, we can lose credit card, customer credit card information, and you don't want to be the company that's on the 6 o'clock news when they're talking about the latest security breach. And there's a list of things that need to be followed, very comprehensive, to make sure that your firewalls are in place and that you've got encrypted data and that you don't have reports laying around with credit card numbers on them and people's names. There's a lot of things you need to be able to do inside of your hotel. And it's critical to ensure you're not exposed, because if you have a breach, it's going to be very, very expensive. F&B posting before service. So in your restaurants and bars, if your wait staff can get products before they're punched into the point of sale system, you have a big control problem. I can't tell you the number of times in my life where I've gone to a restaurant and I've been with myself or even been with other people more often, but um, when something's not included on the bill that I ordered, how can that possibly happen? How can I order a drink and then have a glass of wine and one of those things doesn't end up on my bill? Or a menu item of food that I ordered, an appetizer doesn't show up. How can that happen? And I bet you at least 1 in 5 times that's the case. And the reason why it happens is people are allowed to get products from the kitchen and from the bars without someone actually making sure there's a chit or a red line or whatever the process is that ensures that it's posted before service is given. Look for that key control inside of your hotels. It must exist. The proper use of banquet event orders. If you're not using BEOs properly inside of your hotel, it's a big problem. So with BEOs, we want to make sure that all the items that are on there actually make it to the check. So that those BEOs need to be audited every single day. We need to make sure that late items and change items are followed through. I used to work in a hotel where we had a person, and this is all they did was review BEOs against banquet checks. And they found the first year we put this position in place, they paid for their salary 5 times over just by finding mistakes the banquet department made. There's a long list of things that you need to do with BEOs to use them properly, but I'm not going to go over them now. But having good BEOs, having them out on time, making sure that people have time for the planning and the ordering of the things they need, it's critical. Making sure guests sign them, on and on and on. Okay, incoming mail into the hotel. It's really important that the right person actually open the mail. You want to make sure that the person opening the mail has nothing to do with um, any kind of banking or depositing or accounts receivable or accounts payable. You want the mail opened by someone like the front desk or the general manager's assistant if he or she has one, or maybe a clerk inside of the maintenance department, but it needs to be someone completely removed from any financial function. You want to do that because things that come in the mail can find their way instead of to your bank account, can find their way to someone else's bank account. And even things like complaints and letters that come in the mail, they need to find their way to the right place. So if someone's opening the mail and redirecting this stuff or intercepting this stuff, it can be a big problem. The use of accident and incident reports. Hotels get sued all the time, and the number one problem they have is they don't have any information about what happened. So every time there's an accident or an incident inside of your hotel involving a guest or involving an employee, when something happens, an accident typically, or it could be just a complaint, an incident or accident report needs to be completed. This is one of the lapsus things inside of our hotels. People don't do this, but it is critical. Automatic systems for password resets. So it's a pain in the backside these days, but we need to have systems that automatically ask us to change our passwords these days. Make sure that those are done frequently and that the password is of a correct quality. Because if we don't have this process, people come and go in our business, and all of a sudden, they still have access to our system. It can create a big problem. And the next one is daily credit card balancing. This is a process that needs to be set up in your hotel so that your point of sale system and your property management system, they have control totals for credit cards, but those need to balance to the terminals, and those terminals then need to balance to what goes to the bank. And if someone isn't keeping track of this and on top of it every single day for Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover Card, things get out of control very quickly. You need to have a really good daily process for balancing credit cards. Paycheck audits. It's so easy for a department manager or assistant to create an employee that doesn't even exist. If you don't use paycheck audits, where you actually make all of your employees come and present their IDs or come in person to pick up their pay stub, even if it's just a pay stub, then you have no way of protecting yourself from people creating employees, paying people that don't exist, paying a friend of theirs. They set them up in the payroll. It can be done. It's quite easy, but the paycheck audit is the way to catch that. And the last one is sales tax paid on time. In the hotel business, governments, it's the same in any business, but sales taxes need to be paid on time. If you're even as much as a day late, it could cost you tens of thousands of dollars in fines for being late on your taxes. So I worked in a hotel where we missed the sales tax because someone was out sick and someone thought someone else was looking after it. It was very costly, and we got our knuckles wrapped pretty severely for it, and rightfully so. We should have a critical date list, and we should know what's going on with the sales tax if it's been paid on time. All right. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Carrie and ask for the results of the last poll and go from there.
Sure. Everybody said yes.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
That's good. 100%.
Yeah, and I just have one question.
Okay.
What's the one thing you want people to leave here today and remember from this series about financial leadership?
Well, I think the one thing you all need to realize is that you can become very proficient with the finances inside of your hotel. It's not difficult. And if you do that, it's going to be it's going to result in greater prosperity for you. And prosperity really is defined by having more time. It's not about having more money. It's about having more time. But if you've got the kind of job where you can control your own time a little bit more and make more decisions around what you do and how you do it, that's the greatest feeling in the world because you have control over your career. You have greater prosperity. And that's the one thing I want people to realize, that that's what's possible. Learning this stuff is definitely within your wheelhouse. It's not difficult. Just apply yourself.
Excellent. Well, I would like to thank you, David, for taking us on this journey these last 5 weeks. I'm sure we all learned a lot about financial literacy and a few tips and things like that to help us in our own organizations. And please, if you haven't filled out the survey, please do so, because that helps us at Tourism Saskatchewan gauge your interest in different topic areas and also what you thought about this webinar series as well, so that we can all learn and grow as well. So thank you, and have a fantastic day, everyone.
Excellent.
See you next time.
Thank you, Carrie, for organizing these and hosting them with me. It's been a real pleasure to work with you, and thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.